All right, well, welcome back to the second section here. Over the last couple weeks, we looked at Casablanca and Citizen Kane, both movies that were produced in the early 1940s, and definitely even in the early part of World War II. And now as we kind of move through our timeline, though this isn't a true film history class, the timeline helps us to understand a little bit about the culture and what they were going through. After World War II, the era known as the post-war era, there were a lot of things going on in the culture that were very unique to American history, particularly in the fact that you have tons of GIs returning from a war that on the battlefront, even though it was a noble war, it was heroic, it was standing against fascism, it was standing against people who were trying to control the world and have genocide on groups, massive groups of people that they didn't agree with or they didn't like. And so the atrocities that our soldiers saw were horrific. And then they came back to their jobs. They came back to teaching school, to working in the auto shop, to being business people and so forth. But they weren't the same as they were before. And this is something that, if anybody's ever studied any sort of human history, going back to even the Grecian stories like Homer and the Iliad, the reality is that the hero, he comes back home, but he never returns the same person. And that is based on truth. He also returns back to a country that is different. Now think about this. If you have a massive group of men leave, well, what happened? Who ran the factories? Who worked in the fields? Well, it opened up a lot of opportunity for women to go into the workforce. And so when they came back, they had a taste of independence. It also opened up opportunities for minorities to work in the workplace, and gave them a certain amount of understanding of what it would be like to be part of, if you will, normal America. And so you have all these groups coming back together, trying to put together a country that, going back to some social norms and ideas and the way things should be, but it just not quite fitting together again. So there's disillusion. There are sometimes certain strifes. And it definitely is a challenging time. Now, it's interesting, if you talk to my grandparents or other people from that era, they don't talk about that. The reality is the tension was there, but the culture wasn't to deal with it. They didn't have support groups for GIs. The GI went back and he got his job and he started working. He married, if he wasn't already married, raised his kids and moved on. I mean, I know both my grandfathers, even though one of them wasn't directly in World War II, he did work for the Navy as an electrician building ships. And both of them, as soon as the war was over, what did they do? They had kids. They bought homes. They moved to Orange County and helped start that whole boom down there. And there was the whole baby boom that happened with tons of babies being born. And so on a surface level, you have people trying to find normacy, something that would make them feel normal. But underneath, there's this tension brewing. And we're going to talk about a couple genres of movies in a little bit here that really reflected this in a certain way. Not every movie made had this in it, but we definitely can go back and see that tension there as well. Also, a very interesting phenomenon was going on too. Even though Russia was an ally of America during the war against Nazi Germany and Italy and Japan, very quickly lines are drawn in Europe. And Russia's communist influence over Eastern Europe came in. Berlin was cut in half. Germany was cut in half. The Iron Curtain was quickly drawn. And we had the beginnings of the Cold War, which added a great deal of international tension. We just came out of a horrible war, and then all of a sudden we're faced with the reality that communism, as not only a political entity, but as an ideology, is spreading. See, it's not just in Europe. There are people in South America that are talking about it. There are people in Southeast Asia that are talking about it. China, Mao is on a move, and China is on its way to communist. The battles are going on. And so what is quickly perceived as a threat, it becomes what is known as the Red Scare. Who are the communists? Are there communists in America? I remember the Communist Party during the Depression. They thought, well, maybe it's a better solution to what capitalism's offering. Look how this has all crashed. Were they trying to overthrow the government, or were they just trying to propose some ideas that might help people live better? But nonetheless, as we move into the late 40s and definitely in the early 50s, we have this scare going on. Are the communists trying to take over the world? Are there communists in America that are secretly trying to subvert the government? And on top of that, the whole fear of nuclear weapons, the atomic bomb that was dropped on Japan. 2 of them dropped on Japan. Hundreds of thousands of lives wiped out in just a flash. That frightened people. I mean, honestly, think back to when you were a kid. I can go back to the early to mid-'80s, and the Cold War was still going on. Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev going at it and talking, and there was in the back of my mind that, you know what, if somebody went nuts, they could press the button and a nuclear bomb could go off. Now, this day and age, we don't think about it as much. Terrorism definitely seems to be the current, I guess, scare, if you will. And there's a fear that some of them might get small nuclear weapons and blow up a portion of the city. But back in the Cold War, there was a fear that all of the world, civilization as we knew it, could be wiped out if we weren't careful. So you have all these cultural tensions going on. I mean, yes, World War II ended. People were happy. I can picture the sailor kissing the woman on the street in New York City. And, oh, we can get back to work. We can get back to our normal lives. And that was there. But it wasn't normal anymore. There were things that were different. There were social issues that were being dealt with that hadn't been dealt with before. And then we have the fear that perhaps communists might be trying to overthrow governments around the world. Maybe they were trying to do it here in America. And then we have the nuclear threat going on. And then very quickly the Korean War starts. And so I think there tends to be, I know I might do this. I look back at my grandparents' generation and I think, oh, wow, the 50s, what a wonderful time. And you know what? There were a lot of wonderful things during that time. I don't want to paint a picture that it was all horrible. However, there were tensions going on in the culture. And we're going to see in a moment here how they are reflected in a couple different genres. First, we'll talk briefly about film noir and what that is and how it developed. And then secondly, we'll look at a lot of the genres in the 50s, particularly the science fiction genre, that Invasion of the Body Snatchers really comes out of, and how these movies really kind of reflect the era that they were made in. So, see you in the next section.